Honey, why don't you take those in?
I'm going into town tomorrow.
When you peel back the pre-Columbian history of the United States, you might just find the Book of Mormon. Hidden in the Heartland. The United States has a rich history, from the arrival of Columbus to the miraculous journey of the Pilgrims to the signing of the Constitution. But what of the history before Columbus came to the New World? And just how new was it? The general consensus is when Columbus arrived, he met up with ignorant savages, incapable of any advancement in science or culture. But is this true? And do we really know the history of those ignorant savages? And finally, was Columbus really the first to discover them? Here in Marquette, Michigan, home of the largest supply of copper in the U.S., is a gathering of people known as diffusionists. Every year, the Ancient American Preservation Society meets to show their evidences of transcontinental diffusionism, which basically means they strive to prove that Christopher Columbus was actually the last in a long line of visitors from other countries to the New World.
We have been given all this information that Columbus discovered America and all this stuff that isn't all true. We've not been told the rest of it.
Part of the belief of diffusionism is that culture and advancement are shared from one part of the world to another.
Diffusion is the way ideas get transferred, not that the environment determines something on the way you think.
We're told by academia that no one crossed the oceans because the maritime technology was not available to ancient man. They could sail around Africa and in and out of the Mediterranean, but for some reason they couldn't tackle the Atlantic Ocean. Oftentimes we find that is just not the case. We know for a fact that ancient man was running the seas way earlier than he's given credit for. And that's beginning to come out. And maybe after all they were crossing the waters by some type of craft.
Many examples exist. Bob Wheeler found ancient carvings on his property. Here he shows a reproduction of the carvings.
This is the symbol, 3 lines going down and 2 crossing it, this line being north-south. One interpretation is that it's Ogam, which is an ancient lettering system from Europe. Also found stone tools there, handheld hammer stones. And I believe they were using them to shape sandstone.
So who lived here before Columbus? And more importantly, why are there no records of these scattered civilizations?
This nation has a great history. It simply hasn't been told.
Franklin Keel, former director of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, helps answer these questions.
The first explorers who came here, who found any evidence of pre-existing knowledge on the part of the Indians, destroyed it, essentially. The Spaniards were well known for that. We don't know what they encountered, people like DeSoto, when he came through the South. There were great civilizations there.
You know, what I learned from my grandfather and grandmothers is that our history had basically been buried. Whatever was written down had been burnt. Whatever had been drawn had been taken from our people by the government.
In spite of great accomplishments in advancing liberty, there are still some problems that have stained the history of the United States.
When my mother was in Indian schools, they were still punished for speaking their own language.
When I was a kid, we weren't allowed to speak our language.
This country came about over treaties. We were told this, that the ones with the white wings would come, the sails, and this is what they're going to do. They were going to try to Christianize us, trying to educate us with schools, universities, a better way of life, farming. They said we weren't farmers. We were farmers.
It makes it difficult when your culture has been systematically destroyed. That was the purpose of the American Indian policies.
Who owned the land? It was the natives. So they started to push on the East Coast and eventually pushed us to the West Coast. That's basically what happened.
As that policy evolved from one of pushing them off and getting them out of the way of the white settlers, it was okay to kill them, genocide. Whenever they found that they weren't going to go away, they tried assimilation, make the Indians be like the dominant society.
Destroying history is nothing new in our world. In the early 1500s, Hernando de Soto was the first European to witness and record what life was like among the natives of the North American continent. His journals describe city after city of this ancient people, indicating a densely populated culture once existed. Some maps show his travels went as far north as modern-day Illinois. Instead of studying the history of this ancient race, De Soto's band was focused on domination and slavery. Disease and destruction brought a death count in the millions among the native population. We may never know what life was really like in pre-Columbus North America. Years later, as the newly formed United States was building its relationship with Native Americans, the concept of manifest destiny was created.
It was a philosophy espoused by some American politicians that said that from the East Coast to the West Coast, this would one day be one nation, and that any obstacles in that path would be destroyed. And the Indians were viewed as simply that, an obstacle.
Mr. Powell? Mr. Powell, I know you're busy, but this gentleman wanted to show you what he found.
Hello. I was told that you might be able to tell me what this was, and if it might be worth something.
What do you think this is?
I got no idea, but those inscriptions aren't from anywhere around here.
Seems to be telling a story.
It might be from the flood.
Wow. The flood.
Where did you say you found this?
On my property under a rock. Don't know who it belonged to before colonization.
Well, this is not authentic. You see, the flood is a biblical story brought here after Columbus.
Well, I got plenty more of these. Where'd this come from?
Well, maybe so, but see, this is modern machinery marking. This is not authentic.
Well, that's because I used my tools to pull it up out of the ground.
You see, the problem I have here is I can't verify that you found it where you say you found it without a proper representative.
Well, it's not like I can hire a university professor to walk around with me all day while I'm farming, can I?
I'll give you $10 for it. Nothing more.
Fine.
Give this to the accounting clerk on the way out. Put this with the others. You know where it goes.
Yes, sir.
John Wesley Powell was a real proponent of manifest destiny in gathering up the Indians and putting them on reservations and really silencing their cultural achievements.
Steve Smoot is author of the book Lost American Antiquities and producer of the documentary Lost Civilizations of North America.
Following the introduction of the Lost Civilization of North America, I had a lady of Indian descent come up to me, and she said that we as an Indian people have lost our history. In fact, our history has been referred to as prehistory, as if we have no history. Manifest Destiny was used in the 1800s. It was a way to change the agenda and put forward American expansionism as they would look to take away the lands of the Indians and put them on reservations. But if the Indians would be seen as an advanced civilization or of Hebrew descent or European descent, then perhaps you couldn't make the argument that they were just savages.
Archaeology in the United States, the biggest single problem that we have is that what was determined as its foundation to build upon is still being used today. And that was set up by Cyrus Thomas and Powell and Henry Morgan.
These men came together in the 1800s to form a subset of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And in so doing, they were really almost looking to advance science over religion. Now you have Lewis Henry Morgan. He is referred to as the American father of anthropology, who actually spent time studying with the likes of Huxley, Spencer, and Darwin.
Lewis Henry Morgan wrote the book that was called Ancient Society. And in this book, he talks about how all human civilizations go through 3 stages of development. They start off as ignorant savages, they work up to barbarism, and then up to the level of civilization. And it was that book that actually coined the term ignorant savage. And he used that term in referencing the Native American Indians.
As you view society through that evolutionary lens, it changes how you value many things that many people still hold very sacred.
This is John Wesley Powell. This is the director of the Bureau of Ethnology at the Smithsonian Institute. He said this: artifacts found prior to Christopher Columbus's arrival would be considered illegitimate by the Smithsonian. Only the savage Indian culture would be observed, and this created the artificial barrier to science. Only the savage. By the way, I want to thank the directors of the documentary Lost Civilizations of North America for bringing these stories to my attention. I was blown away. To find more, visit the website lostcivilizationdvd.com.
John Wesley Powell is American original. He was the first of the nation's great continental explorers. And he was part scientist, but part social reformer.
John Wesley Powell was born in the 1830s near Palmyra, New York. His father was a Methodist minister.
He became one of the most powerful men in the sciences in America. He became director over mound building exploration. He became director over the Bureau of Ethnology at the Smithsonian. And he became director over the U.S. Geological Survey Department. And in these very influential and powerful positions, he was able to handle how we view man and how it's being taught in our schools today.
Once Powell went down the Colorado River, he essentially became a folk hero in the United States, and he had the ear of every president after him until his death.
John Wesley Powell said that social problems are so complex that few are able to comprehend all the facets of these problems. Whether we desire it or not, the ancient inhabitants of this country must be lost. And we may comfort ourselves in the reflection that they are not destroyed, but are gradually absorbed to become part of a more civilized community.
Powell made a statement, it's right there, you can read it in black and white, that anything found anterior to the discovery of this country before Columbus, just walk away from it.
By claiming that Native Americans had never achieved anything other than being ignorant savages, they could then take their lands away from them, but also it tended to discredit Joseph Smith and the claims of the Book of Mormon of a highly advanced civilization that was here in the heartland of North America during the Book of Mormon timeframes.
It made it almost impossible to be able to advance the things that Joseph Smith wanted to advance, because he saw the Indians as descendants of the lost 10 tribes. He saw the Indians as a special people that just needed to understand who they really were, and that they would grow and blossom as a people. And so everything that he was looking to advance was going contrary to the political agendas of the 1800s.
Over 70 years ago, Jay Bound served an LDS mission among the Native American groups in the state of New York.
I served in the Eastern States Mission, upper state New York, among the Iroquois nation. It was a combination of the Oneidas, the Onondagas, the corn planters. Some of them had Books of Mormon on their shelves. They believed the Book of Mormon was their record, all right, but they didn't necessarily join the church.
Some Native Americans see the Book of Mormon as a piece of their lost history. For example, Sean Littlebear shares how the book introduced him to the Mormon faith.
When I got out of the orphanage that was here in Oklahoma, one of the missionaries that came down with the social workers said that what the Mormon church is built on is a little book that was discovered here in America, and it was written on gold plates and translated by a prophet, Joseph Smith, and it entails a history of people, which he said were your people. This is a history of your people.
Could there be links between the Native Americans who resided here before the arrival of DeSoto and the people spoken of in the Book of Mormon? The facts may never be known. The closest we have is the folklore shared among the ancestors of the Native American.
And I pay very much attention to the oral histories of the Native Americans. We should listen to their stories. We do not do that, and it is a major, major mistake.
Whenever I deal with the Iroquois up in New York, that's where I've seen the similarities. The Iroquois stories are a couple of examples of things, that to me are connected with the Book of Mormon. Whenever I look at the Oneida Nation's symbol, their great seal, that goes along perfectly with the Book of Mosiah, the story where the Indians, after having accepted the gospel, buried their weapons of war. In Iroquois legend, the great peacemaker uprooted a tree, and they threw their weapons into the ground, and he put the tree back over it, and that tree was a white pine tree, and that's part of the symbol of the Oneida Nation. There's another one out of the Book of Mosiah. It talks about the priests of King Noah who fled into the wilderness and were bad guys in the first place, and while they were out in the wilderness, they chanced upon a spot where some young women would go to have fun. And they captured those women and carried them off. And that's an interesting story in the Book of Mormon. But if you go into the Museum of the Cherokee in the Smokies, there is a display on the wall, and it tells the story of the Nicotani. This was a priestly group. They said they don't know where they came from or who they were, but they were evil. And they captured the wife of a young warrior. He was so angry that he got the people together, and they rescued his wife and destroyed that priestly group. That may be an interesting story that just happens to be a coincidence, but to me, the specification that it was a priestly group who did these bad things lines it up more with the story in the Book of Mormon, where they were bad priests.
It's hard to imagine how somebody could have forged 30,000 artifacts and buried them over 7 states in dozens of counties.
It puts an ancient Hebrew people here in North America before Columbus.
So whether we have an uncontrolled dig or a controlled dig, if we find something of antiquity, we lose.
Hidden in the Heartland.